There's a lot that goes into managing up. Like, I think that's become this sort of like cliche term. Managing up is simply being a data-driven person, having the conversation with your leader. And I always call it vision, victory, and programs. Where CFOs and revenue leaders don't see eye to eye is when the revenue leader goes, I want this $20,000 thing, buy it for me, approve the budget. And that's the worst thing that can happen. You have to come to them with numbers. If the data and the anecdotes from the field match up, there's a good chance that what you're looking at on the data is a reality.
Change is a hard thing. Where do you start?
I'm always starting with the
Ned, how's it going, brother?
Dude, it's going phenomenal, man. How are you?
Pretty good. Can't complain. Just moved to my new place and oh man, it's a lot of work furnishing it, but can't complain. Back to the old city. Super pumped having you on the show.
Yeah.
We've been talking about doing a podcast together for quite some time right now, and I'm glad we made it happen.
Yeah.
Just tell us a little bit about yourself and your journey and how you ended up in sales in the States for so long.
Yeah, so I didn't ever think I was going to be in sales, but I actually initially went to school to be a strength and conditioning coach, and did a couple of internships, had a couple of D1 internships, had one pro internship, and realized pretty quickly that I didn't want to make $20,000 a year working 20 hours a day to get my way up to maybe potentially making six figures if I was actually good at what I did, So ended up going and getting a business degree after grad school, kind of got bit by the business bug, and had a really, really good mentor early on in my life and early on in my career who gave me my first shot at a Silicon Valley startup. And that's really where it all started. I was actually knocking doctors' office doors. I worked for an investment firm who bought doctors' offices and put them into a conglomerate. And he was one of the investors in that fund. And we got to know each other. And he gave me that first opportunity. It's actually a funny story. We met at a Starbucks and I thought I was going to pitch him on this new fund. And he ended up saying, hey, how much money do you make a year? I was like, not enough, brother. And he was like, you want to make more? And I was like, yes. Yep. And then literally like a month later was out in San Francisco. And, 2.5 years at that company, we ended up being acquired by a large company in the fitness tech space, and followed him around for a couple more gigs. Got into consulting with ClozeLoop after that. And that's really where I attribute a lot of my leadership growth to. And I always say I spent, 2.5 years at ClozeLoop, and I learned 10 years of information just by learning, through osmosis from Corey and Hillman, who are two of the smartest revenue minds in all of business, whether it be technology or anything like that. Once I spent 2.5 years there, I, for some reason, thought I could go start my own company. And so I did, and we started Beam. My business partner Alex and I started Beam in July of 2021, and it was an HVAC and solar company. And then we added roofing. Ended up selling that. We built that to 8 figures in 18 months. I wish it was 18 figures in 8 months. That would have been a lot better. It was 8 figures in 18 months. Sold that to private equity and was the chief revenue officer at the larger organization that purchased us. And that's been one hell of a journey, because you go from, our sales team was like 12 people when we sold. Our total company was 50. And then we got acquired. And now I'm in charge of all of our marketing, sales, and customer success. And it's close to 100 people that I'm directly in charge of, in a 250 person company. It's one hell of an experience, that's for sure. Growing pains and a lot of learning experiences for sure.
Wow, that's a crazy but amazing journey. It sounds like you're one of those people, and correct me if I'm wrong, you're really rely on great people more than anything else. So you mentioned about your first gig in Silicon Valley. You met your mentor at Starbucks. That's the story by itself. We can talk about it. And then you met Corey and started the ClozeLoop. And then again, started your company with your co-founder. And I assume you guys still have great relationships.
Oh, yeah.
It seems like for you, it's all about the people. but you correct me if I'm wrong.
Yeah, I realized at a young age I was an idiot. But I mean, as much as that is a joke, I really realized in my career what my strengths are.
Mm-hmm.
And instead of, I got a really good piece of advice from that initial mentor early on was, you know, double down on your strengths. Don't try to like go and work on your weaknesses. Go and find people that where your weaknesses are their strengths. And that was probably the best piece of advice I've gotten in my career, because where I'm like, I'm not a very outgoing guy. I've done well in sales, but where I really flourished was kind of the back end systems, process, structure, leading teams, that kind of stuff is really where, I love a spreadsheet. You put a spreadsheet in front of me and dude, I'm stoked for days. You give me an organization that is struggling, and I can within a weekend know exactly what levers to pull, where to go, how to do it, build the systems, the structure, the SOPs. That's where I am just awesome. Everyone that I've surrounded myself with have been the galvanizers, have been the people that can rally the troops. Like, to put it into perspective, Alex Martinson, who was my business partner, I mean, that kid could recruit someone out of $1 million salary because he did. The guy was making $1 million selling solar in Arizona, moved to Kernersville, North Carolina, with no guarantee of anything happening just because of Alex. And so I've always needed that visionary, because for me, I'm very much a guy who's like, all right, I see what you want to do in the next 10 years, but I need to know step 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 in
Mm-hmm.
order to get there. And if I can build those steps personally, I feel a lot more confident in it too. So, yeah.
I love that. Look, it sounds like you're a guy who relies a lot on data. So
Mm,
I remember we even had a conversation a couple of months back and said, hey, these guys are my generals. I trust them, fully. They know their job. My
yeah.
job is to look at the data and see what's not working and then strategize and give direction to people. So
Yeah.
let's talk about what you're looking at. For example, your case. Of course, like this is fantastic, by the way. Big congratulations.
Yeah.
You sold your company, you joined a private equity firm, bigger company,
Yeah.
from having 12 people to right now over 100 people, right? It's
Yeah.
crazy. Like multiple different teams, different needs, different skill sets. Where do you start, and what is it that you're looking for when you join a new organization again and you have this
Yeah.
shift? You said it's been a good learning journey for me. What are those things that you're looking for before you get anything
Yeah.
started?
Yeah. I mean, that's a great question, because I think everyone has a different opinion on this, right?
Mm-hmm.
And so what I always look for is, what is the goal? Right? I'm always wanting to understand. And when I say that, like, there are founders that I've worked with where the goal is just what they want to do this month. Like,
Mm-hmm.
that's as far out as they're looking. Right. And it's like, okay, cool. Maybe we should probably at least look out a quarter, but like, um, but I want to know, when I'm working with an organization, is the goal an exit? What are you looking to exit to? Are you looking to go public? Are you looking to be acquired by a firm? Are you looking for your largest competitor to buy you because you're doing something exponentially better than they ever could? Like, what does that look like? And where does the revenue need to be in order for us to get there? And then from there, that's where I can start to look at, okay, cool. What is the capacity of the team that we have today, right?
Mm-hmm.
Can the team that we have today get us to that goal, right? And I think with AI, there is now a much easier path to say, oh, okay, cool. That, we could go build $100 million company with 10 people and, some agents, right? But then I want to actually start to understand, what do the processes look like? And
Mm-hmm.
depending what I'm over, as a chief revenue officer, I'm looking at everything from our marketing, our click-through rates, our CPMs, our cost per lead, right? How many MQLs come from that? I know that's a dirty word in the tech space these days, but MQLs still matter, right? You just have to actually like define them, what a real MQL is. But then, like, what are the conversion metrics between all of those? Are there any gaps in the funnel? Do I see any leaks in the funnel coming from that? And like, once you have that process in place, from marketing to sales and then customer success, where you can look at, the NPS scores and the customer satisfaction, what's our net retention rate, then you can actually build out a full funnel system that then takes that organization from, hey, we want to be $1 billion in the next 10 years. And that just being something that the founder like does to galvanize people on the all hands meeting to, okay, here's the step we're going to take this year. Here's what it needs to look like. Here's what our headcount capacity looks like. Here's how many leads we need to get. Here's the exact lever we need to pull on the sales organization. But I mean, my initial conversation is always, where are you looking to go? And what does the organization look like today from a metrics and numbers standpoint?
I really love this. You know why? Not only the breakdown was amazing, but the fact that you look at that, the main vision. What do you want to do with this company? Like where we are even planning to be in next year, in 10 years, moving forward. So you define that, and then you look at your current situation. It was an interesting conversation with another friend of mine, and he said, I did an interview, and it was so funny because the founder said, hey, I want you to move us up market.
Mm-hmm.
And this is the target for next year. And in 5 years, we're going to be there. I said, okay, sure. Let's take a step back. Let's look at your A's right now. Let's look at quota attainment. Let's look at all the numbers that you guys are hitting. How many of these accounts that you're talking about you closed so far?
Yeah.
In what period of time? And how many of your A's actually did it? And apparently it was only one deal that came through his network. And I was like, we don't even have a case study. You don't have any playbook whatsoever. So maybe your timing is a little bit off. So
I've seen that a lot, right? I've seen that in a ton of organizations. My wife was actually with one that did that. And I mean, it cannibalized their entire revenue stack because it was like they had a consultant that came in. They hadn't even sold one of these deals. They had a consultant that came in and was like, you could sell this for 10 grand a month. Well, their packages were like $500 or $1,000 a month. And he's like, bro, you could go do this. But the thing the founder didn't realize is like the $10,000 a month product, to build that's going to take over a year. You can't be selling vaporware, right? And expect your churn to be anywhere. But then also look at your current headcount. Who can sell, $120,000 a year product when you're selling a $12,000 a year? It's a completely different sales motion. It's completely different from an outreach standpoint, from a marketing standpoint. It's completely different from a skill set standpoint, the assets that you need, the mindset that these people need to have. And I think there's a lot to be said around, a revenue leader being able to step in and say, hey, we're not there yet. Hey, you want to get from 125 million to 250 million. You want to double your revenue. Okay, well, let's actually just look at what it would take for us to get there. And I think the slowing down to speed up is so crucial in revenue leadership. And I think honestly in leadership as a whole, period, to just understand what that's going to take. And I think that too often when I hear someone say that they want to move up market, what they're saying is that they feel like they've hit the ceiling in the market that they're in right now. And I would always push back on that, right? Because I would just always ask them, what's your industry, who's your industry leader, right? And maybe it's a CRM. Oh, it's Salesforce. They have a tower named after them. Bro, if you don't have a tower named after you, you haven't hit your ceiling. Sorry, the end. And so I think there's a lot to be said around understanding what changes can be made versus what changes should be made. Right. And I think there's a lot to be said, and a lot of and this is where data and I nerd out on this so much, is because you can model everything out, right? You can that's the great part about AI. That's the great part about Google. You can look at industry averages and benchmarks and what it looks like to go from selling an SMB product to even a mid-market product. There is a elongated sales process. You probably have, you might not, but you could have fewer people in your addressable market. There's a lot that goes into it that I think a lot of people ignore because they're like, dang, we sold this one customer that one time who came from my MBA friend, and it's just let's actually dig into the data. Let's look at the trends and start to see what the actual next best step is.
All right. No, this is really helpful. But let me ask you this. Typically, some of these, hypothetical numbers comes through the board, especially if you're a, venture-backed company. So let's talk about, those conversations, because at the end of the day, you're leading revenue. Of course, like CEO, sit on the table and have a conversation,
Yeah.
but you're the one who's going to, protect the reality and say, hey, this is what's happening inside your organization, our organization.
Yeah.
This is not realistic what you're saying. So giving that reality check comes with some obviously tension. So I wanted to hear if you have any stories you can share, or at least just high level tell us like how tactically,
Yeah. I
have
mean,
those conversations.
if you're ever in a position where you have a number that you have been given by someone because that's been what's been promised to the board, it really is important that you go back and you do the legwork of saying, here is how close I can get to that number realistically. And then from there, you are able to then, like, whether you have access to the board or you have to go through the CEO or whatever it may be, is what I always say is, get as close to that number as possible with the current headcount, with the current conversion rates, with the current stack that you have, and then give the opportunity to say, well, let's say we get 80% of the way there with everything that we've got right now. Then go out and talk to your counterparts, right? So let's say you're a VP of sales and sales has $100 million number and you can get to 80 million. I'm going to go talk to my VP of marketing counterpart. I'm going to go talk to my VP of customer success counterpart and say, hey, I've got $100 million number. I'm at 80. Is there a way that you can help bring an additional 10 and you can help bring an additional 10? How can we go do that, right? Is there an upsell motion that we can put into place? Is there, from a marketing standpoint, is there anything we can do on the ad side or new ideas that you guys have in your back pocket that could potentially do that? And it doesn't work all the time. They may be like, dude, heck no, we're not going to, there's no way, right? But that at least gives you some leverage to go back to that CEO and say, here's the number you gave me. Here's realistically what we can do. Here are the programs that I'm putting in place that are going to allow us to increase the conversion rates or decrease the sales cycle time, increase sales velocity, whatever it may be. Here's what I'm working on with marketing. Here's what I'm working on with customer success to be in alignment with them. And we're still only at 92 million. Like, in order for us to go get that additional 8, here's what I would need from you. And that conversation goes a lot better than you going, nah, I can't do that. Right? It goes a lot better. And I think there's a lot that goes into managing up. Like, I think that's become this sort of like cliche term. You see courses on managing up and things like that. Managing up is simply being a data-driven person, having the conversation with your leader and saying, hey, here's what I'm seeing, right? And I always call it vision, victory, and programs. So CEO gives the vision, and we work together to figure out the victory. What does victory look like at the end of the day, right? Because the vision could always be like, we're going to go do 200 million, but they really only told the board 100, right? So what does victory look like? Victory would look like us going and hitting 100 million. Okay, what are the programs that need to be in place for us to go actually hit that? And when you can do that and you can have the conversation around the VVP, I think that's where you start to be able to have those conversations. And what's really interesting, just in my experience in boardrooms as well, when you come to them with data-driven actual numbers and your VVP, your vision, victory, and programs, you'll actually see the board go, yeah, cool. Okay, if you hit 90 million, like, we're good, right? We still want to see 100, but based on what you're saying, we don't want to increase headcount. We don't want to increase, our OpEx. We don't want to increase these things, especially in today's market. It's like, if you can come prepared with what today looks like, if we stay what we're doing exactly now with these additional programs, here's what I can expect: an additional 25%, increase in close rate, which, by the way, doesn't mean going from 50 to 75%. It's, not percentage points, right? But, an additional 25% in close rate, an additional, 10% in click through, and, 5% better in churn. we can go hit 92 million. I can get you an additional 2 million. I can't get you an additional 10. You'd be surprised how often people are like, no, that makes sense.
So it's just like backing your claim with data. And I think it makes sense to everyone, but sometimes again, um, as you know best, we go with the easy route of hiring more people. Let's
Yeah.
get more headcount. Let's get, more people calling and sending emails and even leveraging technology to make
Yeah.
noise. And that often, again, we know the result. It goes nowhere. But as a CRO, like just imagine this situation is clear. Hey, this is it. We gotta hit the number. I understand that you have, your reasoning makes sense. Hire more people. That's the way we want to lead this, and you agree on. So then your disagreements might be with the CFO because you have your, especially when balancing growth, like you have
Yep.
some initiatives, right? Hey, I want to go hire people. I want to buy technology, or maybe spend more on marketing. How do you have those conversations with the CFO?
Yeah. I mean, the CFO, in my opinion, is the easiest conversation in the world if you know your numbers, right? Because if you can prove to a CFO that an initial investment is going to yield a return on that investment, the CFO will be your best friend. Where CFOs and revenue leaders don't see eye to eye is when the revenue leader goes, I want this $20,000 thing, buy it for me, approve the budget, right? And that's the worst thing that can happen in any sort of conversation with the CFO. You have to come to them with numbers. I mean, our CFO at Addicts, he's literally one of the smartest human beings I've ever met. 90% of the things he says goes way over my head. But like, he and I have a great relationship because it's just like, hey, Andre, we need to go get X amount more leads. I need an increase in my marketing budget by this much because here are conversion rates. Hey, if we go do this and we go spend more on a cost per lead basis to get a higher intent, higher quality lead, our conversion rate will go from 3 to 6% MQL to sold opportunity. That means that going from $85 to $100 cost per lead is only a $15, right, increase. But, oh, by the way, we are doubling our close rate. So if we get 100 and 100, we're going to go close, instead of closing 3, we're going to close 6. Our cost per sold opportunity is now, instead of 1,500, it's now 1,000. You're welcome. I just put $1,500 back in your pocket. Give me my money, right? And so I think there's just, in my opinion, and I know there's a lot of like leaders out there that are much more like soft skilled focused than I am, that would maybe disagree with this, but I think everything goes back to the data. Everything goes back. And I would even say, like, on a person to person level, right? When I was in my early stage in my career, sure. Did I, want to know why a sales rep was in sales? Did I want to know, about their cat and their dog and their family and all of these things that,
Hmm.
oh, what's their favorite football team? Sure. But that being said, when I'm looking at the data, I'm looking at the org average versus rep average, that individual rep. If we have multiple markets, I'm looking at the market they're in average versus what they're at, depending on the conversion rate. I'm looking at their individual conversion rates, their individual cost per sold opportunity. It all comes down to numbers, because without the numbers, I also can't tell you like where to coach. So if I'm looking at uncovering challenges and outlining the path to success and creating an action plan with this person, I don't know how to hold them accountable, and I don't know what the biggest challenge is if I'm not looking at the numbers. I can listen to calls all day and I can be like, oh, well, that's not working and that's not working. But I've had some really, really good reps that did not follow any of the framework that I set out and built in the sales organization. And they closed deals left and right better than guys that followed my framework. Maybe I'm just bad at building frameworks. Who knows? But it's like, what am I going to sit there and just like say, oh, no, well, you didn't ask this discovery question, so that's why this didn't move forward. Well, no, there's probably other things that I can see just from looking at the data. And sure, it's important to listen. It's important to dissect their calls and understand those things. But when it comes down to brass tacks at the end of the day, it really does come down to the numbers, and the numbers help you coach. The numbers help you pinpoint, and the numbers help you scale an organization where you should scale the organization. And where I think most organizations get it wrong is they want to increase headcount on the sales side. Well, if you're not hitting your number right now with 10 people because your pickup rate is 5%, you get into conversations 20% of the time, and you only, out of 100 dials, only book 3 people. I guess technically you're going to double your output if you put 10 more people on there. But why don't we look at where in that process things are breaking, right? If people aren't picking up their phone, maybe I have to use, some call enrichment tool, right? Maybe that's the investment. Maybe I don't need 10 more sales development reps. Maybe I need those reps to, instead of 5% pickup rate, have a 15% pickup rate, because it's not their calls that are going wrong. It's the fact that they're not talking to anyone, right? And if they are, maybe they have a 15% pickup rate, but out of 100 calls, we're only booking 1 appointment. Well, maybe I need to look at the conversation, or I need to look at the targeting or the messaging or things. So it all comes down, in my opinion, to what do the numbers tell us, right? Data and then anecdote, right? Because if the data and the anecdotes from the field match up, there's a good chance that what you're looking at on the data is a reality. A lot of times what we do, and we see this with revenue leaders, is they hear the anecdotes from the field. I can't sell this product. We don't have a good feature, things of that nature. And I always say, well, what does the data say? Right? And that's the biggest game.
This is really, really interesting. It just reminded me of something, might be irrelevant to this, but it was really interesting conversation right before this. This gentleman is going to be on a podcast, and he said, look, I rescue dogs, and I always make an example of leader of a sales org being a leader of a pack of dogs, right? And you don't come and say this is a bad dog. You look at your training and say, like, what's actually not working? Do you believe your reps burn leads practicing on client calls? When it comes to giving them one-on-one coaching sessions, you just don't have the bandwidth, so you get rid of them altogether? Or maybe you notice that your team spends a lot of time on non-revenue tasks like taking notes, updating CRM, or drafting emails. These are the exact challenges we solve for other revenue leaders like yourself. With Sell Me the Spend AI Coach, you can offer your reps role-play sessions at scale while automating one-on-one coaching sessions based on your best practices and methodology. Also, AI will take care of all their non-revenue tasks, like note-taking, CRM updates, draft the email for them, so they can focus on constant improvement while you're focusing on one thing and one thing only: revenue growth. If you're interested in learning more about the clients we are working with or use cases that might be beneficial to you, check us out at sellmethespend.ai. Yeah. I don't want to talk about training, but based on your experience, I want to ask, when you look at a sales organization over 50 people, typically, do you see skill problems, or you see more of a process problem, or maybe sometimes even product market fit problem? Like, I want to hear that from you.
Yeah, if I have 50 sales rep and we don't have product market fit, I've done something pretty damn wrong. So I hope to God that's not the case. But what I will say is, in most cases, when you get to that size of organization, there are 2 things that I really do see. It is mainly a process problem, like whether that process be that we're not, and at 50 people, we're probably targeting different segments of the market and things of that nature. There's typically an outlier segment that is doing well. And what I've seen is it's typically the segment that started the company, right? Because what happened was the founder got into the sales process. They built out great SOPs. They hired, the right way. And then from there, they went from SMB to mid-market, and mid-market is having trouble because maybe they didn't do the same amount of work in order to get to the place where mid-market isn't. So I would say when you get to that size of organization, a lot of it is process. And I'll even say a lot of it is enablement, because when you are moving upmarket, when you are adding new people, whatever it may be, it is a completely different enablement process too, right? And I think about this when I think about addicts. It is a completely different process in our organization. We have completely different SOPs selling in New York City than we do in Richmond, Virginia. Because for us, right, there's different permitting processes, there's different even things that we can say in the home in New York City versus Richmond, state credits, federal credits. All of that goes into play in a tech company too, right? There's a different persona, different buying committees. There's, when you go into enterprise deals, you're actually having to create an actual mutual action plan. Whereas in SMB, it really could be a 3-call close, right? It could be a discovery, a proposal review, and then coming in to sign the paperwork, right? It could literally be that. In enterprise, it could take 18 to 20 touches. And inside of that 18 to 20 touches, you've got a bunch of other things that need to happen. And so what I see in most cases is it is a process issue, but because there's a process issue, there's a skill issue and there's a skill gap. But you can't, unless you've enabled your sellers to actually do the job the right way with the correct enablement, the right coaching, the right tooling, and the right process, you're never going to bridge that gap. And you're going to go through people left and right because you actually haven't enabled them to do the job correctly unto itself.
That's really, really interesting. And what you're saying make a lot of sense. Now let's talk about bringing that new enablement, motion, program, whatever we call it. Change is a hard thing, mostly for people, obviously.
Yeah.
Like you got your frontliners, you got your managers, you got your directors. Everybody's running the show the best way they can, right? They have their own playbook. They historically, did things that, sometimes work, sometimes not. Where do you start?
So depending on the size of the company, but I'm always, always, always starting with the reps. I'm always going to want to start to listen to the calls, have conversations, shadow, really understand what the reps day to day is and what they're struggling with. Because it's really, really easy to start at the VP level and have someone be like, yeah, these guys suck here, 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 and here. I always, if I'm putting a new enablement program in place, I am always starting with the end user of that enablement. So now I have put in manager enablement, which, well, guess what? The end user was the manager. So now I'm putting in coaching tools and want to know their day to day and sit in on their one-on-ones and understand how they're listening to calls, what they're doing, what are they coaching on, how are they holding accountable, things of that nature. But I always want to start with the end user of that enablement. And if I can understand at least 80% of what they're doing on a day-to-day basis and get reality too. And I'm not just interviewing sales reps. I'm like sitting with them for 2 hours while they're calling. I'm calling with them. I'm shadowing in their discovery calls. I'm shadowing in their demos. I'm shadowing in their proposal reviews and having those conversations. And I will do this for 30, 60, 90 days, however long it takes, because otherwise we're just throwing a bunch of education. And the biggest issue that I see, especially in enablement, is most enablement is product focused, right? Hey, let me get you another white paper. Let me get you another piece of content that you can send to this person once you get off. But in reality, enablement, it's called sales enablement for a reason. If we're doing sales, I'll call it revenue enablement. But it should be directed at the person who is in front of your prospects. Or if you're doing manager enablement, it should be directed at the person who is in front of your salespeople. Now, I can say I've never done executive enablement. Maybe that's my next project, but I would still start with what the day-to-day is of the C-level execs or the VPs or whatever it may be. But I think that's where a lot of people get it wrong, is they just kind of, oh, where's the wind blowing? Oh, discovery. Let's start with discovery. Let's train them on this. Or, oh, we need white papers, or we need a new deck, or we need this to look nicer. It's like, well, if they're not struggling with the deck you have right now, but they're just struggling using the deck in discovery, maybe we should train on how to use the deck in discovery properly, not just make a sexier deck.
You're a dream CRO, whoever is listening to this, because I guess you said, look, I start with my leadership team because I want to understand their perspective, get their buy-in. But what if they're biased?
Yeah.
What if they, they don't want to show the reality? Let's just, face it. When I said product market fit, a team of 50, because I've seen this right now, especially in tech, maybe your industry might be a little different. You see that tiny companies come and really challenge bigger guys because, it's possible.
Yeah.
It is possible. Then you rethink whether you really have product market fit or not. And the funny thing is, you see most, CROs at that level said, I have VPs. They have directors, they have managers. It's not my job go and sit with the rep, but it sounds like you still go and sit with the end
Oh
user.
yeah. I listen to calls every morning for at least an hour still to this day. And for an hour, I have it blocked on my calendar every day. I listen to calls. And it's not anything from the perspective of like, I'm going to go to that rep and be like,
Of course, yeah.
hey, your call sucked.
Mm-hmm.
Maybe I'll go to the VP of sales development and be like, hey, dude, I listened to 3 of these calls. These, like,
Mm-hmm.
just keep an eye on this guy. But more than anything, it's for me to understand, because I
Mm-hmm.
can't think strategically if
Yep.
I don't know what's being tactically executed. Because
Mm-hmm.
there's too often in businesses that you see these founders or these C-level execs or VPs spend months and months and months on an initiative that never actually gets used. And
Mm-hmm.
it's like, well, I can tell you exactly why, because you guys locked yourself in a boardroom.
Yep.
You figured out all this stuff off of a spreadsheet, which again, I love spreadsheets. They're my friend. But if you are doing an initiative that is going to affect an end user, it is your responsibility to make sure, number one, that it involves the end user in the implementation process and the iteration process, but that you're also holding that accountable, that it's actually being done. I'll give you an example. At Addix, when Beam was first acquired into Addix, we changed HubSpot accounts.
Mm-hmm.
Well, the company that acquired us, that we merged into, the larger organization, used completely different objects, properties, workflows, everything like that. And so it took a good amount of time for us to actually like be able to re-instruct and re-implement and get this to be, second nature, quote unquote, to our sales reps after spending, some of them 2 years, 2.5 years actually utilizing our processes. And it's like, what the biggest thing that I can say is the reason we were as successful as we were in that was because I didn't just like record a Loom video and say like, hey, here's the new thing, or send out an email, here's your new logins. We had trainings every single morning and that I was in, that we could answer questions. And oh, by the way, I made sure that at the end of every single day, I was going in and checking on dispositions, making sure the leads were going where they needed to go, making sure that the guys knew how to utilize they had an internal business intelligence tool, how to utilize that. And it was a constant iteration, a constant process. And every change that we've made, I've had that same, and it hasn't always been me, right? It's been our managers, our directors, our VPs that do that. But that's how I train our guys. It's like, hey, if you're going to create a change as a leader, it's not your job just to go, hey, here's the change, best of luck. It's your job to bring them into the conversation, talk to them about the change, have them understand why the change is happening, give them clarity on the end result. But the big piece that people miss is the accountability piece. Is this
Mm-hmm.
thing actually being measured? Is it being managed? And is it happening? Because without that, you're never going to see success on any of your change. And that's where change management, which is probably a completely different podcast, but that's why change management is so difficult to people, is because they actually never achieve the accountability piece of following up on that change. And that change, the follow up isn't, oh, well, we'll see in 90 days if this thing happened. Guess what? Humans are involved. Shit ain't happening, brother. Like, it's just not happening. Like, you could have the best laid out plans, just add humans, it's going to be messed up, right? And
Mm-hmm.
that's not a shot on any of us. That's just how we are as human beings. We have to be held accountable until this new thing in our life becomes a habit and it becomes executable without us even thinking about it.
And that's how you build that accountability culture, if you will, by showing that, hey, I'm a leader of a pack. I still go and get my training on HubSpot. I go
Yeah,
call shadow. I give you some reality check about your team.
yeah,
So that's what I'm expecting from my team, because I'm doing it. I'm showing it
yeah.
to you.
Well, I can tell you, it's like our VP of sales and our VP of sales development are, I mean, two of the sharpest dudes in the world, period. The end, hard stop. Like, the tech space should be jealous that I have them. What I'll tell you about them is, named Nick Hansen is our VP of sales. Bentley Pelotu is our VP of sales development. Those guys know the numbers better than anyone else. When I got to Addix, neither of them knew what a spreadsheet was,
Mm,
right? Those guys listen to calls on a daily basis. When I first got to Addix, it was, I mean, like, yeah, I think the guys are doing well. Like, I talked to these guys. and this is not a shot at them before me and then after me. I am a stud, but what I did is I just showed them, hey, this is the expectation. And not only did I show them, I did the expectation, and I continued to do the expectation. And I continued to say, like, hey, what are we doing to make sure that this metric is being fixed? Okay, we have decided that we're going to go listen to calls, and we're going to go coach this way, and we're going to go implement these things. All right, now let's go together. And I think where a lot of people get to is when they get into that VP or C-level role, is they go, oh, thank God, I never have to talk to a rep again. It's like, no, like you do. You should. You should want to be going out there and doing that, because your strategic planning it all hinges on the people that are on your team. And if you can show that from a C-level position to your VPs, they're going to show that to their directors, who are going to show that to their managers, who are going to show that to their reps. And what's cool is I was in Utah 2 weeks ago, and I was on the SDR floor, just kind of like walking through, and one of the guys, our SDR, he's literally sitting on his phone, just kind of, doing his day trading. And one of the kids came up and was like, dude, you need to be dialing. I didn't say a word. Right. Honestly, I was interested to see how much money he made off that trade, to be real. But it's the culture of accountability and that peer-to-peer accountability. And the peer-to-peer accountability starts at the top. It starts with me holding the CEO, the CFO, the COO in line, who then we hold our VPs, who hold each other, then the directors, then the managers. And it all starts at the top there. If you can show what a culture of accountability looks like, everyone follows suit, and you just have an organization that is humming, and even when it's not humming, you just have people that know what tweaks to make it hum again.
That's what you want. You want a community of people who, hold each other accountable and hold themselves accountable more than anything else, because they look at their peers. Everybody's doing their best.
Yeah.
I don't want to suck. I want to be good.
That's true, because, one thing Bentley does probably better than anyone I've seen ever is he is probably the best at like actual, like shouting people out. And what he does really, really well is he doesn't necessarily shout out the result only.
Yeah.
I think leaders do a piss poor job of this, where they'll be like, great job, Michael got a sale today, and everyone's like, yeah, but what did Michael do to get that sale? And Bentley does that really, really well, where he'll get into his SDR meetings and he'll be like, hey, Bentley, Michael booked this appointment, it got closed. Well, let's just go over what happened before this. He did this, he did this, he did this, and it followed the process exactly. And so when someone says, oh man, he made a sale, great job, if you don't compliment the steps that it took in order to get to that thing, people then go, well, I want to make a sale. Me too. But they don't have the steps or the processes to get there, because the leader didn't actually take the time to go through. Like, he followed the process exactly. And the thing Bentley does really well is he's a documenter, and he would document, like, screenshot this message, that conversation, this follow-up email, making sure the person stayed, this call recording to make sure they showed up at the home. Like, that's the thing that I think a lot of leaders miss out on, is when you create those systems, when you create those processes, obviously you have to stay on top of them, but you have to commend people for sticking to those. You have to commend people for doing it the exact way and achieving the outcome that you wanted as well.
I love this so much, because not only it helps you actually build a better process overall, because these are success stories, right?
Yeah.
Real stories, not from the playbooks, best practices. But what it does is, I think it makes it really clear for other refs to see that it's not just a bias shutout. It's not because I close deals too. But look, these are the steps that this person took to get here. And maybe for that person, those steps were really, really hard.
Yep.
And funny, I want to share some quick notes here about like shutouts. One of the things that I randomly started, doing at one of the companies I used to work at as a rep was we had this channel for, winning. So
Mhm.
when someone closed the deal, typically we see that person gets a shout out and CRO, everybody jumping like you're a rock star, putting emojis and to hype it up. I was like, you know what? This is what I'm going to do. Next time I close something or do anything, special, I'm going to tag everyone who got involved.
Yeah.
From people who asked a question, from someone who actually booked the meeting, someone, and that has started a loop. And other reps have started tagging other people who got involved, and it turned to a culture that it's not one person. It's a team sport. Everybody went involved in this deal, so it's
Yeah.
not only about me. So I would say again, for leaders listening to this, sometimes we forget because we have, let's say, AE is closing the deal. Who booked the call?
Yeah.
Who's the engineer who got on the call? Who's the CS person who did a good handoff right
It's
after?
the yes person's got to deal with your shit.
Exactly. So it's good to again just be a little bit more mindful. All right, look, I really love this conversation. To wrap it up, I wanted to hear, in you reflecting on your career, what personal development has most significantly, influenced your approach as a CRO?
So I'll give this one, and I'll probably think of like 12 others once we hang up this call. But this one's fresh on my mind just because I actually talked to Dale Saturday, Dale Dupree, 2018. I'm sitting with him, and at that time I was managing a team of 10 reps, and I'm like, why won't these guys do what I tell them to do? I think every manager's ever sat in that chair. And he said something to me that was it was really eye opening. He said, no one cares as much as you. And his explanation behind it was that you want this outcome to happen. You
Mm-hmm.
want these systems to be followed. And even just to talk on a rep level is you want this deal to close. You want this. Guess what? That other person on the other end of the table, they have other things that they're focused on. And like if you're going into
Yeah.
businesses or you're having conversations, it's like, man, you want this to happen.
Mm.
So it's the reason that that was such a great like personal development thing
Yeah.
for me was realizing that like, hey, stop worrying about what you want and
Mm-hmm.
start focusing on the outcome for the other person. And it helped me as a leader because I started to ask questions of like, hey, why does this matter to you? Right? What happens if this doesn't happen for you? Right? And as a leader, you can now get into deeper conversations with your reps. If you're a rep, it's more like, I really don't care if I close this deal, detaching from the outcome, because it's like, if this isn't going to help you in the best way possible as an organization, I shouldn't sell this to you in the first place. And so,
Mm-hmm.
what it also does is it frees you up as a human being just to ship before things are ready.
Mm-hmm.
And because it's like, guess what? No one cares if your proposal is on a Google Doc, if it achieves the thing that they want to achieve,
Mm-hmm.
right? It also allows you to like take your ego out of 99% of the situations, because guess what? No one cares what car you drive. No one cares what house you live in. No one cares what zip code you live in. I can promise you that, right? Apparently, where we live is like the number one community in Florida. You know how many people that meet me are like, Ned, I love you because you live in the number one community in Florida. Zero people, right? And it's like, dude, no one in my neighborhood cares about the cars we drive. No one in my neighborhood is like,
Mm-hmm.
wow, look at that house. No,
Yeah.
I'm going to go do whatever the hell I want to do
Mm-hmm.
in my life and not worry about like the thoughts and emotions and feelings of other people. But on the complete other side of that, of no one cares as much as you care, is that now I'm only focused on the outcome for the person that's across the table from me. Because I know that if I understand what they care about, that I can't talk them into caring about what I care about. I need to understand what they care about and align everything that I'm doing to the thing that they care about. And I think that was a huge trajectory in my career. And I'll probably, like I said, think of like 12 other things and be like, man, that would have been that.
Wow, man, I love this. This is such a great advice, and it's so hard to execute. Like it's so
Right.
hard to do it yet properly and not jump the gun try to give feedback and say, hey, this is what we need to do to get the numbers up. And,
Yeah.
take a step back. They don't give
Yeah.
a damn about it. I love it. I love it. Ned, thank you very much. It was a great conversation. Again, if someone wants to reach out to you, can they? How?
Yeah. LinkedIn, probably the best place to like reach out, or you can subscribe to my newsletter and then reply every Sunday when it comes out. It's called Meaningful Momentum. It's all about my journey of trying to find myself after selling a company and going through founder depression.
Good problems to have.
Yeah. It is funny. Like I've got friends that I'm like early on, I'm like, man, I'm so sad. And they're like, oh yeah, sure. Yeah, like, okay.
I feel sorry for you.
And like now I look back, I'm like, oh yeah, you're right. Okay. But yeah, I think LinkedIn's the easiest place. Just message me. And if I don't reply back, I promise I'm not a douchebag. It's just because you got lost and just bump it up to the top.
Or maybe your messaging sucks. Go work on it.
Exactly. That's it.
All right, man. Thank you very much. I guess until next time,
Yeah.
bye for now.
Thanks, brother.
Cheers.